I never thought a plastic snow fence would turn into a legal nightmare. But here I am, sitting in a courtroom in Burlington, Vermont, wondering how my life got this complicated over $40 worth of orange mesh fencing. My name is Isaac Young, and I moved to the Pinecrest Meadows subdivision 3 years ago after getting a job as an electrical engineer at a renewable energy company downtown. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard, and the price was right. What nobody told me during the home inspection was that the Homeowners Association president, Brenda Carmichael, treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. The trouble started in early January when Vermont got slammed with back-to-back snowstorms. We are talking about 2 feet of snow in 3 days, the kind that makes you question your life choices about living this far north. My driveway sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, and every winter, the snowplows would create this massive berm right at my driveway entrance. I would spend an hour clearing my driveway only to have the plow come by and undo all my work, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to the hardware store and bought a snow fence. Not one of those permanent wooden structures, just a simple 4-foot-tall orange plastic mesh fence that you stake into the ground. The whole point was to catch the drifting snow before it blocked my driveway. I set it up about 15 feet from the street, completely on my property, following all the guidelines I found online. The fence worked beautifully for 2 weeks. Then Brenda showed up. It was a Tuesday morning around 8 in the morning. I was finishing my coffee when I heard a car horn blaring outside. I looked through the window and saw Brenda's silver Lexus SUV sitting in the cul-de-sac, and she was gesturing wildly at my snow fence. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, already knowing this was not going to be pleasant. "This is completely unacceptable," Brenda shouted before I even reached the end of my driveway. She was wearing a puffy white coat that made her look like the Michelin Man, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her a headache. "You cannot just put up structures without HOA approval." "It is a snow fence," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It is temporary. It comes down in spring. I do not care if it comes down tomorrow." The HOA bylaws clearly state that any exterior modification requires written approval from the board. That includes fences, temporary or otherwise. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. "Brenda, it is not even visible from the street when there is no snow. It is just helping manage the drifts. Rules are rules, Isaac. I am going to have to fine you for this violation. You have 48 hours to remove it or the fines will continue to accumulate, $50 per day." I felt my jaw drop. $50 a day for a snow fence that is helping me keep my driveway clear. Should have thought about that before you violated the HOA covenants. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her Lexus, which she had parked right in the middle of the cul-de-sac, blocking anyone who might want to pass. I watched her get in her car, still fuming. But then something strange happened. Instead of driving forward to leave the cul-de-sac, she put the car in reverse. She was not looking behind her, too busy typing something on her phone. I realized with horror that she was backing straight toward my snow fence. "Brenda, wait," I shouted, waving my arms. She either did not hear me or did not care. Her Lexus kept coming backward, picking up speed. The rear end of her SUV hit my snow fence with a loud crack. The plastic stakes popped out of the frozen ground, and several sections of the mesh got tangled up in her rear bumper and undercarriage. Brenda slammed on the brakes. She got out of the car, leaving the door open, and stared at the mess. Orange mesh was wrapped around her rear tire and dragging on the ground. One of the stakes had scratched along the side of her bumper. "Look what your fence did to my car," she screamed. I stood there dumbfounded. You backed into it. I tried to warn you. This is your fault. If you had not put up this ridiculous fence, none of this would have happened. She pulled out her phone again and started taking more pictures, this time of her car and the damaged fence. Brenda, you were not paying attention. You backed right into it. I want your insurance information. Now, my insurance. You hit my fence. Your fence damaged my car. I am going to have to get this checked out. There could be alignment issues, tire damage, who knows what else. She was getting more worked up by the second, her face turning red despite the freezing temperature. I took a deep breath, trying to process what was happening. Brenda, I am not giving you my insurance information. You backed into a clearly visible fence on my property. If anything, you should be paying to replace my fence. We will see about that. She yanked the orange mesh off her car, threw it on the ground, and got back in her Lexus. She peeled out of the cul-de-sac, fishtailing slightly on the icy road. I stood there in the cold, looking at my destroyed snow fence. The stakes were bent, the mesh was torn in several places, and the whole thing was a total loss. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything, the tire tracks, the broken fence, the scratch marks on the pavement where her car had dragged the stakes. My neighbor, Tom Richardson, came out of his house across the street. He was retired, spent most of his days watching the neighborhood drama unfold from his living room window. Did I just see what I think I saw? Tom called out. Brenda backed into my snow fence and is blaming me for it. Tom shook his head. That woman is something else. I saw the whole thing. She was not looking where she was going at all. Would you be willing to say that if it comes to it? Like, if insurance gets involved or something? Absolutely. I have been dealing with her nonsense for 10 years. She tried to fine me once for having the wrong shade of brown mulch in my garden. Said it was not on the approved color list. He walked over and looked at the damaged fence. You should probably file a police report just to document it. You think so? With Brenda, always cover yourself. She is the type who will twist everything to make herself the victim. I thanked Tom and went back inside to call the non-emergency police line. An officer said he would come by later that afternoon to take a report. In the meantime, I gathered up what was left of my snow fence and took more detailed photos of everything. Officer Martinez showed up around 3 in the afternoon. He was in his mid-30s, professional and thorough. I explained what happened, showed him the photos, and gave him Tom's information as a witness. He took notes, measured distances, and examined the tire tracks that were still visible in the snow. So she backed into your fence and then claimed you damaged her car? Officer Martinez asked. That is exactly what happened, and now she is demanding my insurance information. Well, from what I can see here, the fence was on your property and she struck it while backing up. That would make her at fault for any damage to her vehicle. You might want to consider filing a claim for your fence. It was only about $40. Still, it is the principle. And you might want to have this report handy in case she escalates things. He handed me a card with the report number. If she contacts you again demanding payment, just refer her to this report and tell her to go through proper channels. Officer Martinez left, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the Pinecrest Meadows HOA, typed on official letterhead. It informed me that I was being fined $500 for the unauthorized snow fence and an additional $250 for damages to HOA property resulting from negligent installation of unauthorized structures. I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. There was no HOA property anywhere near my snow fence. Brenda was just making things up now. I called the HOA board member list, hoping to reach someone reasonable. The vice president was Gary Mitchell, a guy I had chatted with a few times at neighborhood barbecues. He answered on the third ring. "Gary, it is Isaac Young. I just got this letter from the HOA about fines, and I need to understand what is going on." "Oh, yeah." Gary sounded uncomfortable. "Brenda brought that up at the emergency board meeting she called. She said your fence violated multiple bylaws and caused damage." "Gary, she backed into my fence. A police officer took a report. There is no damage to HOA property because the fence was entirely on my land." "Look, man, I hear you, but Brenda is the president and she was pretty insistent. She showed us pictures of her car all messed up. Her car that she damaged by not paying attention while backing up. I am just telling you what happened at the meeting. The board voted to uphold the fines, 3-2. Who voted against it? Me and Susan Torres. But we were outvoted. Brenda, Donald, and Patricia sided together. Donald Kramer and Patricia Lewis. I barely knew them except for seeing them at the annual HOA meeting. They were both retired and seemed to spend all their time on HOA business. "This is insane, Gary. She hits my fence and then fines me for it. You should come to the next board meeting." "It is next Tuesday at 7. You can present your case, show your evidence. I will be there." I spent the weekend preparing. I printed out the police report, my photos, the HOA bylaws, and relevant Vermont property law. I even drove to Tom's house and asked if he would come to the meeting to give his statement. He agreed without hesitation. The next few days at work were a blur. I could not stop thinking about the meeting, rehearsing what I would say. My coworker, Jennifer, noticed I was distracted and asked what was wrong. When I told her the story, she laughed. "Only in an HOA," she said. "My parents dealt with something similar in their neighborhood in Florida. The president tried to fine them for having the wrong type of grass." "What happened?" "They fought it and won, but it took 6 months and a lawyer. Is your situation worth it over $40? It is not about the $40 anymore. It is about Brenda making up fines and blaming me for her mistake." Tuesday evening arrived cold and clear. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a small building at the entrance to our subdivision. I arrived 15 minutes early with my folder of documents. Tom showed up a few minutes later, and we sat together in the back row of folding chairs. The room gradually filled up with about 20 residents. Everyone was curious because Brenda had sent out a neighborhood-wide email about addressing serious violations of community standards. People were whispering and speculating about what was going on. At 7 sharp, Brenda called the meeting to order. She sat at a table at the front with the other 4 board members, Gary, Susan, Donald, and Patricia. Brenda launched into her usual preamble about maintaining property values and community standards. "Before we get to regular business, we need to address a serious matter," Brenda announced, looking directly at me. "Isaac Young has been issued fines for multiple violations, including unauthorized structures and damage to community property. Isaac, would you like to address the board?" I stood up, folder in hand, and walked to the front of the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. "Thank you, Brenda. I am here because I believe these fines are completely unjustified." I opened my folder and pulled out the photos. 3 weeks ago, I installed a temporary snow fence on my property to help manage drifting snow. It was a standard orange mesh fence, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. It was placed entirely on my property, 15 feet from the street. I passed around copies of my photos showing the fence installation. 2 weeks later, Brenda came to my house and told me the fence violated HOA rules. While I disagree with that interpretation, I was willing to discuss it. However, as she was leaving, she backed her car into the fence without looking. I tried to warn her, but she was not paying attention. Brenda's face was getting red. That is not what happened. I have a witness, I continued. Tom Richardson saw the entire incident from his house. I also filed a police report that afternoon. Officer Martinez came out, documented everything, and confirmed that the fence was on my property and that Brenda backed into it. I handed copies of the police report to each board member. Now I am being fined for the fence, which I can understand even if I disagree with it, but I am also being fined for damages to HOA property. What HOA property? The fence was on my land. Brenda damaged her own car by not paying attention. Tom stood up from his seat. I saw the whole thing. Brenda was looking at her phone and backing up without watching where she was going. Isaac tried to warn her, but she could not hear him. She drove right into that fence. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Isaac, your fence was a hazard. It was too close to the street and created a dangerous situation. It was 15 feet from the street, entirely on my property, I replied. The police report confirms that. Gary leaned forward. Brenda, if the police report says the fence was on Isaac's property and you backed into it, how can we fine him for damage to HOA property? The fence created a visual obstruction. It was a hazard to drivers. A 4-foot orange fence is a hazard to drivers. Susan spoke up. Brenda, it sounds like you just were not paying attention. I move that we rescind the fines, Gary said. All of them. I second that, Susan added. Brenda looked furious. We have not heard all the facts. There is more to this situation. What more facts? Gary asked. We have photos, a police report, and an eyewitness. This seems pretty clear-cut. Donald, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. I think we need to take this seriously. If we let people just put up any structure they want, where does it end? It was a snow fence, I said. A temporary measure to deal with a legitimate problem. I am not trying to build a shed or a permanent fence, just something to help with the snow. Patricia nodded. I understand both sides. But if Isaac damaged Brenda's car, that is a separate issue from the HOA fine. I did not damage her car, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. She damaged her own car by backing into my fence. The board debated back and forth for another 20 minutes. Finally, Gary called for a vote on rescinding the fines. The vote was 3-2 in my favor. Gary and Susan voted to rescind, along with Patricia, who apparently had been swayed by the police report. Brenda and Donald voted against. The fines are rescinded, Gary announced. I felt a wave of relief. Thank you. Brenda gathered her papers with angry, jerky movements. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped and stormed out of the community center. I thanked Tom for coming and headed home, thinking this ordeal was finally over. But 3 days later, I received something that made my blood run cold. An invoice from Brenda's attorney, demanding payment for $875 for alignment repairs, 2 new tires, and a bumper repair on her Lexus. The letter stated that because my negligently installed fence had caused damage to her vehicle, I was liable for all repairs. It gave me 10 days to pay before they would file a lawsuit in small claims court. I immediately called my homeowner's insurance company and explained the situation. The claims representative, a woman named Carol, listened patiently. So she backed into your fence and now she is claiming you owe her for car repairs, Carol asked. That is correct. And you have a police report stating the fence was on your property. Yes, and a witness. Okay, this should be pretty straightforward. We will deny the claim on the basis that she was at fault for the accident. If she wants to sue you, we will provide a defense attorney as part of your policy coverage. In the meantime, do not pay her anything or admit any fault. Should I respond to her lawyer? Forward the letter to us. We will handle all communication from this point forward. I sent everything to my insurance company and tried to put it out of my mind, but living in the same neighborhood as Brenda made that impossible. Every time I saw her silver Lexus drive by, I felt a knot in my stomach. 2 weeks passed, and I thought maybe Brenda had given up. Then I got a notice in the mail. She had filed a lawsuit in Vermont Small Claims Court for $1,200, increasing her claim to include emotional distress and loss of use of vehicle. My insurance company assigned me an attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Rachel Goldman. We met at her office in downtown Burlington to go over the case. "This is pretty cut and dry," Rachel said after reviewing all my documentation. "She backed into your fence on your property. She is at fault. The police report supports that, and you have a witness. I do not see how she thinks she can win this." "She is used to getting her way," I said. "She has been HOA president for years and nobody challenges her." "Well, a judge is not going to care about her HOA position. We will present the facts, and unless she has some evidence we do not know about, you should be fine." The court date was set for 6 weeks out, in late March. In the meantime, Brenda ramped up her harassment. She started sending me HOA violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My trash can was visible from the street for 20 minutes after trash pickup. My mailbox post needed repainting even though it had been painted the previous summer. My grass was a 1/4 inch too long, never mind that it was still dormant from winter. Each violation notice came with a $50 fine. I documented everything and forwarded it to Rachel, who advised me to not pay any of the fines. "She is creating a pattern of harassment," Rachel said. "This actually helps our case. It shows she has a vendetta against you." Gary called me one evening, sounding concerned. "Isaac, I do not know what is going on with Brenda, but she is on a warpath. She brought up your violations at the last board meeting, and we shot them all down. Susan and I, along with Patricia, voted against every single one. Brenda and Donald were outvoted every time. Why is Donald backing her on everything? I think he just agrees with her philosophy that rules are rules, no matter how ridiculous, or maybe he is afraid of her. Hard to say. This is insane, Gary, all over a snow fence." "I know. Listen, there is talk in the neighborhood about recalling her as president. A bunch of people are fed up with how she runs things. Your situation is just the latest example. How does that work? We need a petition signed by 20% of the homeowners, then we hold a special election. I am going to start circulating a petition. Would you be okay with that?" "Absolutely. This has gotten way out of hand." The petition started making its way around the neighborhood. Out of the 120 homes in Pinecrest Meadows, we needed 24 signatures. Gary reported back that he had 35 signatures in less than a week. Brenda found out about the petition and sent a scathing email to the entire neighborhood, accusing Gary and me of trying to undermine the HOA and destroy property values. She claimed we were trying to turn the neighborhood into a lawless wasteland where anyone could do whatever they wanted. The email backfired spectacularly. More people signed the petition. By the time Gary submitted it to the HOA board, we had 53 signatures. The special election was scheduled for mid-April, 2 weeks after my court date. In the meantime, I had to prepare for the lawsuit. Rachel and I met several times to go over my testimony. Tom was subpoenaed as a witness, and he assured me he was ready to tell the truth. "I've been wanting to stand up to that woman for years," Tom said. "This is my chance." The court date arrived on a gray, drizzly morning. The small claims court was in a municipal building in downtown Burlington. I arrived early with Rachel, and we went over everything one last time in the hallway outside the courtroom. Brenda showed up with her attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit named Howard Brennan. He looked like he charged way more than $1,200, which made me wonder why Brenda was bothering with small claims court if she could afford a lawyer like that. The courtroom was small and informal, just a few rows of benches and a table for each party. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, called the court to order. Brenda's attorney went first, presenting her case. He argued that I had negligently installed a fence that created a hazard, and that Brenda had struck the fence because it was poorly marked and in an unexpected location. My client suffered significant damage to her vehicle as a direct result of the defendant's negligence, Howard said. She has invoices showing $875 in repairs, as well as documented emotional distress from this traumatic incident. He presented photos of Brenda's damaged car, which I had to admit looked pretty bad. The bumper was scratched, and there were some dents I had not noticed the day of the incident. I wondered if some of that damage had been there before or had been exaggerated somehow. Then it was our turn. Rachel stood and presented the police report, my photos, and Tom's written statement. Your Honor, the evidence is clear that the plaintiff backed into a fence that was legally installed on the defendant's property. The police report confirms the fence was 15 feet from the street, well within the defendant's property boundaries. The plaintiff was not paying attention while backing up, and she struck the fence as a result of her own negligence. Rachel called me to testify. I walked through the events of that day, explaining how I had installed the fence, why I had installed it, and what happened when Brenda backed into it. Did you try to warn Mrs. Carmichael that she was backing toward your fence? Rachel asked. Yes. I shouted and waved my arms, but she was looking at her phone and did not see or hear me. And where exactly was this fence located? Entirely on my property, about 15 feet from the street. I measured it carefully before installation. Brenda's attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest that the fence was hard to see or that I had placed it in a dangerous location. But I held firm, pointing out that the fence was bright orange and 4 feet tall, hardly invisible. Then Tom took the stand. He testified about what he had seen from his window, how Brenda had been distracted and had not looked where she was backing. She was on her phone, Tom said. I could see it from across the street. She was typing something and just backing up without looking. Isaac tried to warn her, but she did not notice until she hit the fence. Brenda's attorney tried to shake his testimony, but Tom was unflappable. He had been a high school principal for 30 years before retiring, and he knew how to handle hostile questions. I know what I saw, Tom said firmly. Mrs. Carmichael was not paying attention, and she backed into a clearly visible fence on Mr. Young's property. Finally, Brenda herself took the stand. She testified that she had been backing out of the cul-de-sac as she always did, and that my fence had appeared out of nowhere. It was a hazard, Brenda insisted. I had no idea it was there. There was snow everywhere and the fence just blended in. But the fence was orange, Rachel pointed out during cross-examination. 4 feet tall and bright orange. How did you not see it? I was focused on the road ahead of me. But you were backing up, so the fence would have been behind you, correct? I suppose so. And you were looking at your phone while backing up, were you not? I might have glanced at it. Mr. Richardson testified that you were actively typing on your phone while backing up. Is that correct? Brenda hesitated. I may have been responding to an urgent HOA matter. So you were not paying full attention to where you were backing up. I was being careful. Careful enough to not notice a 4-foot-tall orange fence, Judge Hendricks interrupted. Counselor, I think we have established the point. After closing arguments, Judge Hendricks took about 5 minutes to review the documents. Then she delivered her verdict. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the defendant's fence was legally placed on his own property and was clearly visible. The plaintiff struck the fence while backing up because she was not paying adequate attention to her surroundings. The plaintiff's own testimony confirms she was using her phone while driving. This court finds that the plaintiff was at fault for the accident and is not entitled to any damages from the defendant. Furthermore, the defendant is entitled to recover the cost of his damaged snow fence. Judgment for the defendant in the amount of $40. I could not believe it. Not only had I won, but Brenda had to pay for my fence. Brenda's face went through several shades of red and purple. Her attorney gathered his papers quickly and ushered her out of the courtroom before she could say anything she would regret. Rachel shook my hand. Congratulations. That went exactly as expected. Thank you so much for your help. My pleasure. And good luck with that HOA election. Sounds like your neighborhood needs new leadership. Tom and I walked out of the courthouse together into the spring rain. That felt good, Tom said. Really good. Thank you for testifying. I could not have done this without you. Anytime. Now let us get that woman out of the HOA presidency. The special election was held 2 weeks later at the community center. The turnout was massive. Over 90% of homeowners either showed up in person or submitted proxy votes. Brenda had nominated herself for re-election, but Gary had convinced Susan Torres to run against her. Susan was a nurse who worked at the University of Vermont Medical Center. She was calm, reasonable, and actually listened to people. She had lived in Pinecrest Meadows for 8 years and had served as the HOA secretary before becoming vice president. The election was not even close. Susan won with 78% of the vote. Brenda gave a bitter concession speech about how the neighborhood would regret this decision and how property values would plummet without her leadership. Nobody believed her. People were celebrating in the parking lot after the meeting. Gary was elected as the new vice president, and Patricia stayed on as treasurer. 2 new board members were elected to replace Donald, who resigned in protest, and a vacant seat that opened up. The new board immediately voted to rescind all the ridiculous fines Brenda had been issuing, not just to me but to several other homeowners who had been targeted. But Brenda was not done yet. A week after losing the election, I received a certified letter from her attorney. She was appealing the small claims court decision and suing me in district court for $50,000, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and conspiracy to damage her reputation. The lawsuit was 30 pages of legal gibberish, but the gist was that I had deliberately created a situation to make her look bad, had conspired with Tom and Gary to undermine her authority, and had damaged her reputation by spreading false information about the incident. I called Rachel immediately. She read through the lawsuit and laughed. "This is completely frivolous," she said. "She is just lashing out because she lost the court case and the election. We will file a motion to dismiss, and if that does not work, we will file a counterclaim for malicious prosecution. How much is this going to cost me? Your homeowner's insurance should cover it. This falls under personal liability, but let me check with your insurance company to make sure." Carol from my insurance company confirmed that the lawsuit was covered under my policy. They would provide Rachel as my attorney at no cost to me, up to the policy limits. "This woman sounds like a nightmare," Carol said. "We see this sometimes with HOA disputes. Someone gets used to having power, and they cannot handle losing it." The motion to dismiss was filed 3 weeks later. Rachel argued that the lawsuit had no legal merit, that Brenda was attempting to relitigate a case she had already lost in small claims court, and that her claims were based on protected speech and actions. Before the judge could rule on the motion, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Officer Martinez, the policeman who had taken the original report. "Mr. Young, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We received a report that Mrs. Carmichael has been harassing another resident in your neighborhood, a woman named Jennifer Lawson. Apparently Mrs. Carmichael has been leaving threatening notes on her door and following her around the neighborhood. That is crazy. Why?" Miss Lawson signed the petition to recall Mrs. Carmichael as HOA president. Apparently, Mrs. Carmichael did not take that well. Miss Lawson filed a report yesterday, and we are investigating. I thought you should know in case Mrs. Carmichael escalates with you as well. I appreciate the warning. Also, Miss Lawson mentioned there are several other residents who have had issues with Mrs. Carmichael. We might be reaching out to you for a statement. 2 days later, Officer Martinez and another officer came to my house to take a formal statement. I told them about the lawsuit, the frivolous HOA violations, and the general pattern of harassment since the snow fence incident. "She has definitely focused on you," Officer Martinez said. "We are building a case for stalking and harassment. The district attorney is reviewing everything." I felt a mix of relief and concern. Relief that someone in authority was taking this seriously, but concern about what Brenda might do if she felt cornered. The situation escalated quickly after that. More neighbors came forward with stories of Brenda's behavior. She had been taking photos of people's houses and posting them on a private Facebook group with mocking comments. She had been following people to document their movements. She had even filed false complaints with the city about various properties, causing code enforcement to waste time investigating non-existent violations. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Brenda for stalking, harassment, and filing false police reports. She was arrested on a Tuesday morning, and it made the local news. The headline read, "Former HOA president arrested for stalking neighbors." My phone blew up with calls from neighbors, reporters, and even some national HOA watchdog groups. I declined most interview requests, but I did speak to a reporter from the Burlington Free Press who had been following the story. "This is unfortunately not uncommon in HOA disputes," the reporter, James Chen, told me. "Power-hungry board members who cannot handle losing control. What is unusual is that it escalated to criminal charges." "I just wanted to clear snow from my driveway," I said. "I never imagined it would end up like this." The article came out 3 days later and painted a clear picture of Brenda's escalating behavior. It included interviews with multiple neighbors, documentation of the frivolous lawsuits, and commentary from legal experts about HOA abuse. Brenda's attorney withdrew from representing her in the civil lawsuit against me, and the judge granted our motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning she could not refile. Rachel immediately filed a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. The criminal case moved forward. Brenda pleaded not guilty and tried to argue that she was just trying to enforce HOA rules and protect property values. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Michael Torres, presented evidence of her pattern of harassment against multiple residents. The trial took place in late June. I attended along with Tom, Gary, Susan, and about a dozen other neighbors. Jennifer Lawson, the woman who had received the most severe harassment, testified about finding threatening notes on her door and being followed to the grocery store. "I was terrified," Jennifer testified. "She would park outside my house for hours, just sitting there. I called the police 3 times before they finally took me seriously." Other neighbors testified about similar experiences. Brenda had created a climate of fear in the neighborhood, using her position as HOA president to intimidate anyone who disagreed with her. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Brenda guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended pending 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, a restraining order preventing her from contacting any of the victims, and mandatory anger management counseling. She was also ordered to pay restitution to several residents whose property she had damaged during her campaign of harassment, including my $40 for the snow fence. After the sentencing, I ran into Jennifer Lawson outside the courthouse. She was crying with relief. "I can finally sleep at night," she said. "Thank you for standing up to her. If you had not fought back on that first case, I do not think anyone else would have come forward. I am just glad it is over." But it was not quite over. Rachel's counterclaim for malicious prosecution was still pending. Brenda's new attorney tried to settle, offering $5,000 to make it go away. Rachel advised me to take it. "You could probably get more if we go to trial, but it will take months and a lot of stress. $5,000 is a reasonable settlement for what you have been through." I agreed. The settlement included a written apology from Brenda, which her attorney drafted. It was clearly not sincere, but having it in writing felt like a small victory. The HOA under Susan's leadership was like night and day compared to Brenda's regime. Susan sent out a newsletter apologizing for the previous board's overreach and announcing new policies focused on reasonable enforcement and community building, rather than nitpicking violations. The board voted to revise the bylaws to require approval only for permanent structures, explicitly exempting temporary seasonal items like snow fences, holiday decorations, and garden equipment. They also implemented a formal appeals process for any fines and required a majority board vote before any fine could be issued. Property values did not plummet as Brenda had predicted. In fact, homes started selling faster because the neighborhood was no longer known for its tyrannical HOA. I installed a new snow fence the following winter, and nobody said a word about it. Well, almost nobody. My other neighbor, Mike Henderson, stopped by to ask where I had bought it because he wanted one for his driveway too. "That is a great idea," Mike said. "I have been dealing with those snow berms for years. Why did not I think of this?" "Just make sure you stay on your property," I joked. "Do not want to give the HOA any ideas. Susan is not like that. She actually cares about making the neighborhood better." He was right. Susan organized community events, improved communication, and treated residents like adults rather than children who needed constant supervision. The Facebook group that Brenda had used for mocking neighbors was deleted, and Susan created a new group focused on positive community engagement. Tom and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We got together every few weeks for coffee and to laugh about the absurdity of what we had been through. "You know what is funny?" Tom said one morning as we sat in a local cafe. "Brenda probably spent $10,000 on legal fees trying to get $1,200 from you. Meanwhile, you got $40 and she got a criminal record. The principle of the thing, I guess. Pride. That is what it was. She could not stand being challenged, and she could not stand losing." I thought about that. Tom was probably right. Brenda had spent years as HOA president with nobody questioning her authority. When I stood up to her, it shattered her image of control, and she could not handle it. The restraining order meant Brenda had to stay at least 100 yards away from me, Tom, Jennifer, and several other residents. Since we all lived in the same small subdivision, that effectively meant she could not come into Pinecrest Meadows at all. She put her house on the market 2 months after the sentencing, Gary told me she sold it at a loss because she was desperate to get out quickly. She moved to an apartment in South Burlington, far enough away that we would never accidentally run into each other. "Good riddance," Gary said when the sale closed. "The neighborhood has been so much more peaceful without her." Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on my job, spent time with friends, and enjoyed living in a neighborhood where I did not have to worry about being harassed over trivial matters. About a year after everything ended, I was at a neighborhood barbecue that Susan had organized. It was a beautiful summer evening, and probably 50 people had shown up. Kids were playing in the park, adults were grilling and chatting, and there was a genuine sense of community that had been missing during Brenda's tenure. Jennifer Lawson came over with a beer for me. "I just wanted to thank you again. I know I have said it before, but everything you did, fighting back, documenting everything, getting the police involved, it made all the difference." "We all stood up together," I said. "It was not just me, but you went first. That takes courage." I looked around at the neighborhood gathering, at people laughing and enjoying themselves without fear of being judged or fined for some imaginary violation. It felt good. Susan clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "I just want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. This is what community should be about, supporting each other, enjoying our neighborhood, and working together to make it a great place to live. We have been through some tough times, but we came out stronger. Here is to Pinecrest Meadows and all the wonderful people who live here." Everyone cheered and raised their glasses. Tom caught my eye from across the crowd and gave me a knowing nod. We had been through something that most people could not understand. A battle over something as simple as a snow fence that had spiraled into arrests, lawsuits, and a complete transformation of our neighborhood. As the evening went on and the sun set over the green mountains in the distance, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had moved to Vermont for a fresh start and a good job. I never expected to become the person who took down a tyrannical HOA president. But sometimes life pushes you into situations where you have to decide whether to fight back or back down. I was glad I fought back. Not because I enjoyed conflict, I definitely did not, but because it was the right thing to do. Brenda had been abusing her power for years, making life miserable for countless neighbors. If standing up to her over a $40 snow fence had helped break that cycle, then every moment of stress and frustration had been worth it. The criminal restitution check from Brenda arrived in the mail a few weeks after the barbecue. $40, exactly the cost of my original snow fence. I stared at the check for a long time, thinking about everything it represented. I could have just cashed it and moved on. But instead, I donated it to a local nonprofit that helped people with housing issues, including those dealing with predatory HOAs. It seemed like a fitting end to the whole saga. Rachel called me a few months later with news that Brenda had violated her probation by contacting one of the other victims through a fake social media account. She was now facing jail time for the violation. "Some people never learn," Rachel said. "But that is not your problem anymore." She was right. I had done what I needed to do, stood up for myself, and helped create change in my community. Anything else was beyond my control. The second winter with my new snow fence was uneventful in the best possible way. It caught the drifting snow, kept my driveway clear, and nobody complained or backed into it. Several other neighbors had installed similar fences, and the subdivision looked like a reasonable place where people used common-sense solutions to deal with New England winters. Gary was elected as the new HOA president after Susan stepped down to focus on her nursing career. He ran on a platform of minimal interference and maximum common sense, which resonated with everyone who had lived through Brenda's regime. "I promise to be the most boring HOA president you have ever had," Gary said in his acceptance speech at the annual meeting. "No drama, no frivolous fines, just basic maintenance and reasonable enforcement of rules that actually matter." He kept that promise. Under Gary's leadership, the HOA focused on maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and handling actual problems like broken streetlights and pothole repairs. Violation notices became rare and were only issued for serious issues like major property damage or genuine safety hazards. The Facebook group that Susan had created grew to include almost every household in Pinecrest Meadows. People posted about garage sales, recommended local contractors, warned each other about car break-ins in the area, and generally acted like a real community. One post particularly stood out to me. It was from a new resident who had just moved in, writing about how welcoming and friendly everyone had been, how the neighborhood felt safe and inclusive, and how happy they were to have found such a great place to live. Tom commented on the post. 3 years ago, this neighborhood was a very different place. We worked hard to make it better. Welcome to Pinecrest Meadows." I added my own comment. "Glad you are here, and if you ever need to install a snow fence, go right ahead. We promise nobody will back into it." The new resident probably had no idea what that meant, but several long-time neighbors reacted with laughing emojis and comments about never forgetting the great snow fence incident. It had become neighborhood legend, the story of how a simple snow fence took down a tyrant and transformed a community. New residents heard various versions of the tale, some accurate, some embellished, but all conveying the essential truth that Pinecrest Meadows was a place where residents could stand up for themselves. I ran into Jennifer Lawson at the grocery store one afternoon in early spring. She was loading groceries into her car and looked happier than I had ever seen her. "Isaac, how are you? Doing well? You look great." "I feel great. I got promoted at work and I am actually enjoying living in my house now." It is amazing what happens when you are not constantly stressed about some crazy person harassing you. That is wonderful. You deserve it after everything you went through. We all do. "Hey, are you coming to the neighborhood yard sale next month? Susan is organizing it." I did not know about it. Check the Facebook group. It is going to be huge. We are closing off the streets and doing a whole neighborhood-wide thing. It will be fun. The yard sale turned out to be exactly that. Half the neighborhood set up tables and sold everything from furniture to baby clothes to old tools. Food trucks parked at both ends of the subdivision. Kids rode bikes in the car-free streets. It felt like a street fair. I sold some old electronics and camping gear I was not using anymore, but mostly I enjoyed walking around and chatting with neighbors. It struck me how many people I had gotten to know through the whole Brenda situation. Before that, I had been friendly with my immediate neighbors, but had not really connected with the broader community. Now, I knew dozens of people by name and considered many of them friends. Tom set up a booth selling woodworking projects he made in his garage. Beautiful cutting boards, small furniture pieces, and decorative items. Business was brisk. "I should have done this years ago," Tom said as he wrapped up a cutting board for a customer. But under Brenda's rules, we were not allowed to have yard sales more than once a year, and she made the application process so complicated that nobody bothered. How many times have we had yard sales since she left? This is the third one in 18 months, and look at this turnout. This is what community is supposed to look like. He was right. The subdivision was alive with activity, conversation, and genuine neighborly interaction. This was what I had imagined when I first moved here, not the paranoid, rule-obsessed atmosphere that Brenda had created. As the afternoon wore on and I packed up my remaining items, I noticed several people taking down their tents and tables. Kids were getting tired, and the food trucks were running low on inventory. It had been a successful day by any measure. Susan came by as I was loading my car. "Thanks for participating. This was exactly what I hoped it would be. You have done an amazing job bringing this community together. I just gave people the freedom to be themselves. That is all anyone really wants." I thought about that on the drive home, which was only about 300 feet since I lived in the subdivision. Susan was right. Brenda had tried to control every aspect of neighborhood life, creating resentment and fear. Susan did the opposite, trusting people to make reasonable decisions and creating space for community to develop organically. That summer, I started dating someone I met through friends at work. Her name was Zara Kovacs, and she was a graphic designer for a marketing firm. When I told her about the snow fence saga, she laughed so hard she nearly cried. "Only you could turn a hardware store purchase into a federal case," Zara said. "It was not a federal case. You know what I mean. Most people would have just taken down the fence and moved on. And let her get away with lying and harassing people. No, you are right. I am glad you stood up to her. The world needs more people willing to fight back against bullies." Zara started spending more time at my house, and she fell in love with the neighborhood. She got to know Tom and his wife, attended a few HOA events with me, and understood why I had fought so hard to protect this community. "You have something special here," she said one evening as we walked through the subdivision. "People actually care about each other. That is rare." It almost was not. Brenda nearly destroyed it. But she did not. You stopped her. I did not feel like a hero. I had just been a guy trying to clear his driveway who refused to be pushed around. But I understood what Zara meant. Sometimes standing up to a bully requires courage, even when you are scared and unsure of the outcome. 2 years after the snow fence incident, Gary organized a neighborhood anniversary party. It was not the anniversary of the subdivision being built, but rather the anniversary of Brenda's arrest and the transformation of the HOA. "We should celebrate the fact that we took back our community," Gary said when he proposed the idea at a board meeting. Some people thought it was petty to celebrate someone's arrest, but others argued that it was not about Brenda at all. It was about the community coming together and refusing to accept abuse. The party was held on a Saturday in late June. Someone made a cake decorated with little orange snow fences made of frosting. Tom gave a speech about the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. 2 years ago, this neighborhood was a very different place, Tom said. We were afraid to paint our mailboxes the wrong color or leave our trash cans out 10 minutes too long. We walked on eggshells, worried about arbitrary fines and harassment. But one person said no. Isaac Young said no, and that started a chain reaction that freed all of us. People applauded, and I felt my face turn red. I had not expected to be singled out like that. Isaac did not set out to be a hero, Tom continued. He just wanted to manage the snow in his driveway, but when he was treated unjustly, he stood his ground. He documented everything, sought legal help, and refused to back down. That courage inspired the rest of us to speak up about our own experiences. So today, we are not celebrating anyone's downfall. We are celebrating the fact that we found our collective voice and created the community we all deserve. More applause, and then people came up to thank me individually. Jennifer Lawson hugged me and whispered, "You changed my life." It was overwhelming and humbling. I had never thought of myself as a leader or an activist. I was just an electrical engineer who liked solving problems and did not like being treated unfairly. But I realized that sometimes that is all it takes. One person willing to say no, to push back, to demand better. That one act can inspire others to do the same, and together they can create real change. As the party wound down and the sun set over the mountains, I stood with Zara, Tom, Gary, and Susan, watching kids play in the park and adults chat and laugh. "This is what winning looks like," Zara said, squeezing my hand. She was right. Not the court victory or the arrest or the settlement money. This was the real victory, a neighborhood where people felt safe, respected, and connected. A place where a snow fence was just a snow fence, not a symbol of defiance or a target for harassment. The following winter, Vermont got hit with even more snow than the year of the original incident. My snow fence performed perfectly, catching drifts and keeping my driveway clear. Several neighbors had installed similar fences based on my recommendation, and they all worked beautifully. Mike Henderson, whose driveway faced the same direction as mine, stopped by one morning after a particularly heavy snowfall. His driveway was clear thanks to his snow fence, while his neighbor who had not installed one was out shoveling massive berms. "Best $40 I ever spent," Mike said, gesturing at his fence. "And all it cost you was a year of legal battles and criminal prosecution of your HOA president." "Totally worth it," I deadpanned. We both laughed. The ability to laugh about it meant the trauma had truly passed. Brenda was gone, the neighborhood was healthy, and life had returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. I eventually heard through the grapevine that Brenda had completed her probation and moved to Florida. According to someone who knew someone, she had bought a condo and immediately ran for the board of that HOA. I felt sorry for her new neighbors, but relieved that she was no longer our problem. Gary turned out as HOA president after 3 years, and Patricia Lewis took over. She continued the policies of minimal interference and maximum common sense. The neighborhood thrived under her leadership, just as it had under Susan and Gary. I realized that the snow fence incident had not just removed one bad leader. It had changed the fundamental culture of how the HOA operated. Residents now understood their rights and were not afraid to speak up. Board members knew they served the community, not the other way around. And everyone remembered what happened when power went unchecked. 5 years after the original incident, Zara and I got married. We had the reception at the Pinecrest Meadows Community Center, the same building where the special election had been held. Tom was one of my groomsmen. Half the neighborhood showed up for the reception. During his toast, Tom told the story of the snow fence one more time, to the delight of neighbors who knew it well and the confusion of Zara's family and friends who were hearing it for the first time. "When I first met Isaac, he was just the quiet guy across the street who kept to himself," Tom said. "Then he bought a snow fence and accidentally started a revolution. Now he is the guy who taught an entire community to stand up for themselves." Isaac, Zara, may your marriage be strong, your driveway be clear, and may no HOA president ever back into your snow fence. Everyone laughed and cheered. Zara leaned over and whispered, "I love your neighborhood. I am so glad we are staying here." We had talked about moving to a bigger house in a different area, but ultimately decided to stay in Pinecrest Meadows. This was home. These were our people. And the whole snow fence experience had taught me that community is worth fighting for. As Zara and I settled into married life, I occasionally thought about Brenda and wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. Some people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they cannot see how their behavior affects others. But I also thought about all the people who had been helped by standing up to her. Jennifer Lawson was thriving in her career and her personal life, no longer living in fear. Tom had found a renewed sense of purpose in community activism. Gary, Susan, and Patricia had shown that HOAs could function as tools for community building rather than oppression. And dozens of other residents had learned that they did not have to accept unreasonable treatment just because someone had a title. The snow fence itself became something of a neighborhood mascot. Every winter, more homes installed them. Some people painted theirs or added reflective tape to make them more visible. One neighbor even installed little LED lights along the top of his fence, which looked ridiculous but also kind of cool at night. When new residents moved into the subdivision, they invariably heard the story of the snow fence and the HOA president. It became part of the neighborhood's identity, a reminder of who we were and what we stood for. I installed a new snow fence every October and took it down every April, just like clockwork. It was no longer just a practical tool for snow management. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the importance of standing up for what is right. And every single time I staked those orange mesh panels into my frozen lawn, I thought about that morning when Brenda backed into them and set off a chain of events that changed everything. I thought about the fear and uncertainty, the legal battles and the stress. But mostly I thought about what came after, the friendships forged, the community strengthened, and the lesson learned that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. The snow fence was still just $40 worth of orange plastic mesh, but it represented something much bigger. The idea that you do not have to be powerful or wealthy or influential to make a difference. You just have to be willing to stand your ground and do what is right, even when it is hard. And sometimes, in the end, that is all it takes to change the world, or at least your corner of it.